and I worked there for some time as a SharePoint developer. In total, I work with SharePoint, basically development since 2009. I'm Microsoft MVP in Office development for 2 years now. I forgot to turn on my camera. 1 second. Sorry. Come on. Sorry, that's better now. And hi, keeps. Okay. And you can follow me at Joel FM Rodriguez on Twitter, and also my blog. If you go to m365-dev.com, I generally post more about development content, mainly SharePoint, some things around Azure and Teams, but sometimes also around the Power Platform and technology in general. So the agenda for my session today is based on, so the session itself is based on some work I did for a client, which then turned out to be, at least I think, a good starting point for creating Azure functions. And one of the key things there, in my opinion, is the authentication that is already built in using an Azure AD app registration with certificates. So I have a starting template, which I now can use on any project. I will demo with based on a sample solution, but in reality, that's a template that I can just pick and reuse on any client or any solution that uses an Azure function to connect to SharePoint. And all I need to do is basically grab that and change what the function actually does. I don't need to worry about that. Anything else will be deployable. It's all templated and scripted. And I'll show you in a moment how everything works together. So I'll cover the technologies that I used on the solution, the main ones at least, why I created it, the key points of how the authentication work, and then a solution architecture for the sample that I will show you today, and then the demo itself. So let's start with the technologies. So I'm using PowerShell in general. So the Azure function will be based in PowerShell. I'm using PNP PowerShell for anything related to SharePoint. If you are new to SharePoint, you definitely, and you never heard about PNP PowerShell, definitely have a look. That's the only way, really, that I recommend you do it. So it's such a massive time saver. And now bear with me for a moment because this. Sorry. So the Azure AD app registration that uses a certificate to connect. In terms of Azure resources, apps, an app service, a function, a key vault, a storage account, App Insights, Logic Apps, which are part of the demo solution, and the connections for the Logic Apps itself. And all of that is put together using ARM templates and a script to deploy them. So in terms of motivation, the main things that made me think about building something that could be easy to reuse and have already some building capabilities that I would have to do on every function. Sorry, give me a second. Sorry for that. As I mentioned, the motivation was trying to find a pattern for the architecture of the Azure functions I was going to build, and based on the solutions I have built in the past. Already have built-in support for modern authentication to SharePoint from the function. With, as you can see here on the screen, that's just a screenshot from the admin portal.
Hey, Joel? Joel? We are getting comments in chat that you're not sharing your screen.
Okay, Teams definitely tells me I'm sharing. 1 second, let me share again.
Hi, Joel. Yeah, we can see your presentation. We just can't see your screen.
What do you mean? Can you see now?
Yes, we can.
Can you see the slides now? Let me check the chat.
Yes, we could definitely see your slides, Joel. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'll keep it like here. So the motivation, as I was saying, regarding authentication is to cover the new recommendation to block access to apps that don't use modern authentication. We assume that more and more tenants will have this switched off. So it is important to follow modern approaches. And if it's already built in, I don't need to worry about it. And then, of course, creating a starting template, which at the end of the day is aiming to save time. Sorry, they smell when we are busy. So the key points of the solution is to connect to SharePoint using PnP PowerShell. Sorry, give me a second. Someone is making a big drama. I hope you don't hear it. Apologies for that. The more I talk, the more I catch his attention. Can you see my slides again? So apologies, as I mentioned, is connect to SharePoint using PnP PowerShell. Connect using an Azure AD app registration using a certificate. Securely store the certificate in a key vault and making sure that the key vault is also secured. Using managed identity from the function itself to access the key vault, making sure that it's the function that is accessing the key vault and not a user account. Use a key vault reference in the Azure Function app settings. This allows me to have Azure load the certificate for me and anything else that may be in the key vault, and then wrap up everything in a way that I can easily deploy and reuse. The architecture of the solution that I'm going to show you today, that is built on top of the base template, has a user starting a flow by inserting a request into a modern site, basically into a SharePoint list. The SharePoint list will trigger a logic app based on a specific status. The logic app will send an email for an approval group, so they can decide whether to approve or not the request from the originating user. If they reject the request, we will simply notify the user and end up the process. If the approvers accept the request, we update the request, which will trigger a second logic up. The logic up will add a message to a queue. So we are already playing with a lot of moving parts here. We'll add a message to an Azure storage queue that will then trigger an Azure function. The Azure function will process the request and create a team and a site that are connected, part of a group, an M365 group. And once behind the scenes, the application is using the PNP provisioning with within PNP PowerShell. So the team and modern site could be fully customized as part of the creation process. Once this is done, we update the request that was originally created by the end user, and then we have a third logic up which notifies the user that everything was done. So the authentication process will, with the certificate, will happen from the Azure function here. I'll show you in a second. So let me. This here. Can you see my screen now? I noticed there was another.
We can see your presentation. We can't see your screen.
Can you see Visual Studio Code now?
No. We can only see the PowerPoint slide.
That's really strange because I'm sharing the whole screen. Okay, I'm trying again. Screen one. Can you see?
Yes, we can. Yep, we can see a screen there. Yep.
Windows Terminal?
Yes, we can. Yes, okay. Correct.
So all the solution is deployed, easily deployed from a machine, or it can be deployed via Azure DevOps. In this case, I'll show you via PowerShell script. So I just have a script here which I will trigger, and I will go through things as we see progress going on. So at the moment, it's just going to ask me to sign in to my tenant. Okay. And it's going to, first of all, it's going to create an app registration on the subscription associated with my M365 tenant. To do that, I went with the easiest route, which is using PNP PowerShell. So there is a command that creates the app registration, assigns some default permissions. Let me just there. Oh, sorry, it was here. Okay. So it's going to create the app, assign some permissions. By default, it will have full access to SharePoint, full access to groups and user profiles. It's going to also create a certificate and upload it to the app. We'll see that in a second as the script starts creating things. Wrong one. So this is the authentication setting I was talking about. If you go to the SharePoint Admin Center and Access Control, and then apps that don't use modern authentication, in my tenant is set to block. And if I go to the app registrations here, this is the app I created. So can you see Visual VS Code now, just to making sure that when I switch windows, you are seeing. So you can see here that the app was created. Now I have to approve the permissions, which I just did. And if we go to the app itself, we can see that on the API permissions, now I have all the permissions granted here. And if we go to certificates, yeah, we already have a certificate here. It was added today. Oh, that's nice, 10 years. So we don't need anything else on the app itself. If we go back to the script, seems like my terminal is playing a bit funny, but it's not giving errors. So after creating the app, the script will deploy some SharePoint resources. So if I go to the script itself, so the script itself is this one. I'm executing this one, which is just invoking that one with some parameters. So I don't need to specify the parameters on the demo. So we have a few things here. Some important or relevant things to note is I'm passing environment and instance number and the app name somewhere here. And I use these things to generate all the names for the Azure resources, certificates, app. So everything is dynamically generated based in a few parameters. If we go into the Azure AD app creation, so you can, that's easily done with 2 commands. If you need things that are a little bit different, so the commands are still limited in some instances, but you can specify your own permissions that you are requesting. You can specify some details about the certificate that you are creating. So for example, I'm passing a password. It's flexible, but is not perfect. So in some cases, you may have to go with your own script to create the app registration. After that, we simply connect to Azure. Here we're using the AZ PowerShell module and also the CLI. I'm using both because in some cases there were some limitations, so we end up having to use both and getting the user principal name, which I will need for some additional parameters. So creating the Azure AD app. If the app already exists, I just grab it, and then the SharePoint itself, the SharePoint resources. What I'm doing here is I have a script to deploy SharePoint site and tenant resources. And this is completely generic. The only thing I need to change from solution to solution is the assets that I deploy. So packages, solution packages, like SharePoint framework resources, which I just need to dump in this folder, and sequences and templates, which then basically PNP templates. So this solution can be anything, and it's just a pattern that if you are building solutions for SharePoint, you often have to have sites where you host resources and things like that. So you can just add a template to a site into these folders with custom elements, and the script will just pick up anything that's here and deploy. So let me go that one. So after deploying the SharePoint resources, this is going a bit faster than I thought. I create the Azure resource group and all the resources that are part of this solution. So the prompt that you saw there was for authenticating the logic apps. as part of this solution, we have an Azure function. We have a storage account, which is used by the function, and also has a queue that is created by the ARM template. We have app insights and the service plan, of course. A few things to note. So in terms of Azure deployment, and if there are any pure ARM template advocates here, they may not see what they like here because I put everything into one template other than the logic apps. So I pass a few parameters to the function, to the ARM template that is built around the function. And some additional parameters are also specified as here. In here, I have some things that don't change often, or basically between environments. So the runtime version, so on, and some of the secrets that I will add to Key Vault. There are a few I already know I will add every time for authentication. The additional parameters I'm passing as a additional parameter to the template here. So this is the script that deploys the function, and we can see that I'm just building a dynamic object, which I then pass. So I'm passing my JSON and then some additional parameters, which I can show you here, are basically all I need to change from project to project. Probably not this, but if I need to change how the authentication works, and also the app settings that go into the function. Some of them will be there in the template itself, which I'll show in a second. Some are passed dynamically from the script. So the template is the elements of the solution that will likely not change. And from the script, I pass the things that I change. So if I need to change anything for a specific project, I just adjust the settings on the deployment script. So in terms of ARM templates, we have an account with a queue. You can see here. We have application insights. We have an app service. And this is dynamic from the parameters. So if this is using consumption plan by default. If you need a paid plan, you can just adjust the parameters. We have the function itself, and you can see here, what I mentioned before on the slides, is using system assigned managed identity to access the Key Vault when we configure that in the Key Vault. We have an extension. We limit authentication. Basically, when you create a function, it's anonymous by default. We all immediately lock it when we create a function and put in some authentication using the app that we created. And we have the Azure Function app settings. These are the ones that will go on every project and are specific to authentication. So what I have here, I have an out ID and an out secret. And these are references to Key Vault secrets and can be anything. So in my script, at the moment, I have an out type setting, which dictates the type of authentication that the function will have. And on the template, on the out ID and out secret, in this case, I'm passing the app ID and the certificate password. But it could be really anything. It could be user and pass. It's up to you to decide what you pass here, because they will just take whatever, and then you just use the setting on the app settings to control how to connect. And I then inside the function I have a connection method that, based on the property you specify here, invokes the connect command from PNP using the correct parameters. So for someone who hasn't used key vault references. I will mention in a second how they work. To configure them, you have to forge a specific string which has which is basically a connection to a specific secret version in the key vault. When you then need to retrieve that secret, instead of writing the code to dynamically load the item from key vault, you just need to go, give me this app setting, and behind the scenes, the platform will go retrieve the value. And for you, it's almost as if you had, so for example, if this was a password, your password is here. In your code, that's all you need to care about is retrieving this value. I'm also adding the app ID there because in some scenarios, you need credentials and an app ID, for example, if you are using an app delegated permission. On the key vault, so I'm defining here the access policies. By default, the user that runs the script is just for simplicity here because I was testing some things which will just have access to everything. The function itself, however, you can see here the object IDs from the function. We're using the reference. You will only have get permissions for the secrets and for the certificates. This way, we never expose any additional information to the function. On the key vault, we have the key vault, and then at the end, we just have the 3 secrets, which we use for authentication. So all this is dynamic. When you run the script, you basically decide what to pass here, or out ID, out secret, because in this case, I'm using certificate, which is the approach I hope to use on most projects by default, unless the client doesn't want it. It should just be as easy as executing this as is. And then we just deploy the function using the script I was showing you before. So deploy the ARM template, upload the certificate to Key Vault, and some of these things need to be orchestrated in some order. Here, after uploading the certificate to Key Vault, we get the certificate. We add a specific, again, another reference to Key Vault. This is the key thing for the authentication to work. So I'm using an additional app setting here. If I upload a certificate to Key Vault, I'm creating an additional app setting that is a reference not to the secrets I used before, but to the certificate itself. And when we deploy this, if I go into my Key Vault, and you can see that the secrets are there. My certificate, you can see more versions because I just did a deployment on top of what was there. So the script, because ARM templates, both ARM templates and the PNP provisioning update previous resource, you can run the script as many times as one to patch the system. You will never break things. So on our certificate, it's inside the certificate in Key Vault. This is the thing we need. And this is the important part. So the certificate has a secret when you upload it. And inside this secret is the base 64 certificate with the password. So by having an app setting with this string as a Key Vault reference, we can then get the base 64 from the Key Vault without having to load it or converting the certificate to base 64. We retrieve the value. We basically retrieve the app setting and connect. We don't need to do anything, and it's as simple as that. So let me show you the app settings. Sorry, I was on the wrong tab here. So here on my function, if I go to configuration, we can see that you can see here when it's a key vault reference, it clearly displays straight away. And this is the key vault reference I was talking about. So if we see here, so this is this secret that we saw on the other page after within key vault. With this, I can then from my function. So the function itself is just inside a solution folder. So this is specific to my solution and this as well. So in certificates, you can ignore this. This will never go into source control because of git ignore rules. And this folder is just specific to my solution, but I don't want it to be uploaded to Azure, to the Azure function itself. So I put it outside. Sorry, one thing I forgot to mention, when we deploy the Azure function, so we basically zip this whole folder and upload as a zip package. So my function is here, and I have a connection method, which basically, if I'm using Azure AD app only, I can simply connect, pass it to URL, client ID, tenant, my certificate base64 encoded. And if you look at this certificate, it's basically the app setting that I'm getting there, nothing else. I don't need to convert. I don't need to provide a password. It just works as simple as that. You can see here that I have some exception. So if I'm running this locally, I was having some issues with the password. I'm not sure why. So I basically referenced the certificate by path. Maybe I was just doing something wrong here. So I end up having this exception when I'm running the function in debug here locally. And you can see that depending on what setting you configure on the app settings, you can just connect in different ways. But of course, this is set by default for the app with app registration with certificate. And then inside the function itself, it doesn't really matter. It can be anything I want. That's basically the only thing I need to change. In this case, I'm just doing applying a tenant template. On top of this, I also have, because most solutions will end up having logic apps some way or another, I'm also deploying logic apps. And logic apps is a bit challenging because of basically each solution is unique. You can't really template much or reuse much. So each logic app has its own template, which I extract from the portal and tidy up because the extracted logic apps never have many parameters. You need to tidy up things a little bit. And the connections, sorry, these are the connections. Now it's being a bit noisy, sorry. I also deploy the connections, which I authorize using a PowerShell script. If you noticed when I was running the script, there was a step close to the end where he asked me for authentication. That is basically to authorize the connections. So when I go into the portal, can be the SharePoint one. And API connection is already authorized. When I go into the logic app, So the connection works and everything is set up. Second, sorry for that. So if we look at the solution itself, this is running from a SharePoint site where I have a provisioning template library and the provisioning requests. So I have a request here already ready to go, which is basically going to create a workspace, project workspace 102. It's going to create a group, a site, a team, etc. So if I set this to submitted, and I have the logic apps to trigger every 3 minutes, so I'm just going to fire them, and instead of waiting for them to trigger. So it's running. If I now go to Outlook, this is just to show that all the connections and process was fully deployed. And if I go to my approvers group, you can see that this was done now. Can approve the request. And we should see the logic app running. So once the request is approved, I have my second logic app that queues the provisioning. That is very fast to execute because it basically grabs the data and puts it on a queue. From here, we should see that the Azure Function I should have opened this before to see the connection step. We're probably not gonna see it here. I'm just gonna open. This one was from yesterday. You can see that connection goes straight away. This one is not showing any logs, but we should see, oh, there you go. 102, we can see that it's still creating the team. Oh, we got logs now. So we can see all the progress going on. It's applying the template to the site. Apologies, the little one is being quite demanding at the moment. I was not expecting this to be so challenging. So the template itself takes a little bit because we are doing so many things. And if we go here, you can see that this one already has a team. We can go into teams. And we should have 102 there with some customizations. For example, the wiki was removed. And we can see also the SharePoint site. If we go to, forgot what the URL was, 1 second. In this case, it's just a blank site. I'm not creating anything here. And if we then go to Outlook, not this one, so my Azure resource group, and the final logic app. You can see that it doesn't really matter. It's just going to send an email with the details. So there you go. And with the links for the things that were created. Sorry for that. So the key point here was really adding the certificate as an offsetting reference to Key Vault, which then allows you to create the connection without having to play with the certificate or anything else. I'll try to rush. Apologies because it's being a little bit noisy. So I have some references here for information on the Azure AD App Only connection and the Azure Key Vault certificate reference, which I can share on the chat. So thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Joel, for that. Yes, I can imagine it was very challenging, but thank you so much for persevering. That was really good. So let's take a look. So far, I can't see any questions, to be honest. No questions right now. Joel, it says here, yep, Jarp is saying never apologize for your children. They're great. That's correct. Spot on, Jarp. And
I'll just pick him up because he wants to
there
see
we
what
are.
I'm
There's the star of the show. There is a star of the show. Awesome.
I don't know if you hear him or not. I turned the sound suppression on. I just don't know how good that is.
So, just a question actually, Joel, which is what's the hardest thing to wrap your head around when you're getting started?
Starting with exactly what?
With the with your demo today.
I think the main thing was trying to understand the things around certificates, where they need to be uploaded, how can the app use them, how can we retrieve them without having to load. One thing I didn't mention actually was there is an issue with running PNP PowerShell on the Azure module from the same function. So if you try to get show you in a second. So on my function here, so on the requirements, you can see that I have the AZ module commented out. And the reason is at the moment it doesn't play well with PNP PowerShell because they use the same different versions of the same DLL, I think for analytics, if I'm not wrong. So if you try to load the certificate yourself using the AZ PowerShell module, you will have issues then using PNP PowerShell. So by dynamically loading it using the app setting Key Vault reference, it completely takes away that limitation. That was probably the thing that made me lose our time understanding what was going on there. Any other questions?
Let's take a look. So I don't think there are any other questions, Joel. We just really appreciate you taking your time out today. Let me have a quick look to see if there are any other questions. 1 second. Yeah, so it's mainly to do with the Azure functions connecting to SharePoint. If there are any particular challenges around that, and you mentioned around the certificates. But yeah, the main challenge around Azure functions connecting to SharePoint. Yeah.
No issues. So if you use PNP PowerShell, you can connect in quite a few ways. It's very, very straightforward.
Great stuff there, Joel. So there you have, Joel. So Joel, so feel free to share your contact details in the chat window, or maybe a link to your blog or something. That would be really good, so people can stay in touch and follow up.
Yeah, sure.
That would be fantastic. Great stuff.
Just trying to show. So here, that's basically all you need if you want to connect with a certificate. I will share the links with details on the connection. And again, sorry for the challenge. I was not was planning things a little bit different, but at last minute I had to keep babysitting him. So
fantastic effort, Joel. Honestly, thank you so much for that and managing to do that. So that's great. So that's great. So that was Joel, guys. So Joel's going to share his information in the chat window. Whilst we before we go to the next session, I will share also the form. I think a lot of you have already completed it, to be honest. It's the prize form because we will be all the speakers will be getting prizes, obviously, but we also will be awarding some prizes to the attendees. So let's take a look. Let's take a look. I think we've got over 80 people, believe it or not, who've completed it in the past few hours on the form. So let's. I'll share it once again so that no one has really missed out on that opportunity. So I'll do that now. I'll share the link once again in the chat window for those people who are still interested in winning the prizes that we have. We have 20 hardback copies of Power Apps Cookbook and Power Automate Handbook. We have hoodies. We have badges. We have bags to give away. For those people who attend our in-person events before COVID, you know about those swag that we tend to give away. But we're going to carry on the tradition even through COVID. We will be carrying on with that tradition of giving away those swags. So you can still